welcome again to Continued Story Reading. My name is Keith Borgelt. I'm reading the story of David Gates, Mission Pilot. For 2 weeks, David had kept in close touch with the Ministry of Health in Guyana. The temporary permission to operate his aircraft in the interior would expire on October 31st, 1997. He visited the Director of Regional Services and spoke to the physician in charge of all medical care in Guyana's interior. The physician told him, "I have heard much of the work you are doing for the people in the villages. I promise to get the needed letter of recommendation to the Ministry of Health within 3 days." Daily telephone calls to his secretary and visits to the Ministry of Health revealed he had not come through with his promise. In fact, he seemed to be avoiding both David and David's friend, Winston James, who was Director of Education for the Guyana Conference of Seventh-day Adventists and David's assistant in the aviation program in Georgetown. "I fear the plane will be grounded until that letter is acquired," Winston said, looking discouraged. "Winston, please call the DCA, the Director of Civil Aviation, and tell him all that we've done to comply with his request. Maybe he'll understand and allow the airplane to fly. I know God has acted as our prayers ascended these 2 weeks. I'm sure he's commissioned a mighty army of angels to do his work. He promised to send his angels who excel in strength, who do his word, heeding the voice of his word, and do his pleasure." Psalm 103. This aviation program is his. I choose to trust him for his solution. The next day, October 31st, David called Winston to find out the result. His voice sounded ecstatic. The DCA couldn't believe that all our efforts had produced nothing. He encouraged us to keep flying and not let this bother us. He even added, "If the Ministry of Health doesn't want to help you, I happen to know someone much higher who will certainly give you support. You need to arrange an appointment with the Prime Minister, Janet Jagan herself. I know she'll support your work." "Did you tell the DCA that 7 visitors from the United States will arrive next week? Does he know their plan to develop health and education projects in the interior through ADRA? Did you mention that the Michigan physician who's been covering for Davis Memorial Hospital has accepted our invitation to do medical work in the villages for 4 days before he returns to the U.S.? "Yeah, I told him all that. He suggested that even though the permit technically expires today, keep flying. He wants you to take these visitors to the villages. He emphasized the need to get the appointment with the Prime Minister soon so she can continue to give support in the future." "Oh, Winston, this is exciting," David said. "God plans far exceed ours. The Prime Minister is running for president next year. Imagine Guyana's soon-to-be CEO supporting our program. It's truly great to be in partnership with God." By 3 a.m. on November 4th, all 7 visitors had arrived safely and were in bed by 4:30. Several hours later, after breakfast, David rushed to the bank to cash a check to pay for the chartered plane that would take 5 of the visitors to the school in Parayuma. From there, he took a taxi to the conference office to meet Winston James. Together, they would go to the Minister of Amerindian Affairs to get permission for the visitors to travel into the interior. Stepping into the office, he overheard Winston talking to the Director of Civil Aviation on the phone. Phrases like, "The plane is grounded," hit David hard. The promised letter from the Ministry of Health was almost blank. Without the ministry's recommendation, the DCA could not renew the permit. The mission plane was grounded. "May I speak to him?" David asked. Winston handed him the phone. "I can understand the difficult position you're in. However, may I explain to you that our purpose this past year has been building up to this climax. These visitors have been invited to survey the work that has been done and to offer tangible help in health and education, improved lifestyle, benefits to the people living in the interior. They represent a worldwide organization called ADRA, Adventist Development and Relief Agency. They provide help from drilling freshwater wells to teaching the people industrial skills. Whatever projects they propose will be forwarded to ADRA International Headquarters for funding. Could it be that the problem that has grounded our plane, the only way into remote communities, has been caused by the enemy who hates doing good for needy people?" The DCA agreed. Praying in his heart, David continued, "Would you be willing to extend our permit for 7 days, long enough to transport these visitors?" "No, I cannot." David's silent prayers continued. "Would you be willing to present our request to the Transportation Board?" "Oh, strange you should mention this, because they meet only once a month. It just so happens the meeting convenes this afternoon." David's heart began to pound with hope. "Sir, I am convinced this is no coincidence. Obviously, God is taking control. We'll be praying that when you present the great need for the use of this plane, they'll give their approval. The DCA answered, "Keep up your prayers. It will take all the power of God to convince these men to make an exception." After hanging up, David and Winston asked the ADRA visitor to join them in the conference president's office. "I got bad news," David said. "The plane's grounded. The good news is that our God, who has clearly led in the past, is able to do so now. Let's kneel in a prayer circle and ask that they will grant even more than the 7-day extension we asked for." Earnest prayers went up to God, asking that he use his strong arm of deliverance, and peace filled every heart. "Well, let's proceed with our previous plans," David said when they were finished. "The chartered plane's waiting to take you to the interior now. I know God has already answered our prayers. By his grace, we will join you tomorrow." After they left, David and Winston went to the Prime Minister's office and began making arrangements for an appointment as soon as possible. Next, they visited with the Minister of Amerindian Affairs. "Our village captains from the interior have given us favorable reports of your work. I plan to write letters to both the Minister of Health and the DCA giving our approval to your health and education projects. I'm glad to give travel approval to your visitors from the United States." Winston and David thanked the minister and left. At 3:45 p.m., they called the DCA just as he was returning to his office from the board meeting. "The current of favor has swung your way again. After much discussion, we agreed to extend the time of your permit for 10 days. David's heart sounded jubilant. "Thank you so much. Clearly God is in control. He used you to answer our prayers." As they lifted off the next morning, David and Winston sang together, "Praise God, from whom all blessings flow." "Because of his abundant grace, we have been blessed time and time again," Winston exclaimed. God used the little plane to give the visitors an understanding of the Amerindian needs. Several isolated communities benefited. Arua needed a primary school. ADRA assisted and helped to complete the school. ADRA also provided some materials for the Davis Indian Industrial College in Paruima and arranged to supply food for the villagers, donating voluntary labor for the school. Over the years, Christian kindness combined with healthcare and education have developed close friendships in villages previously unfriendly to Adventists. Near the end of the 10 days of flying permission, David received a number of radio calls from the Guyana Defense Force military base 25 miles north of Kai Ken. 19 soldiers were suffering from malaria. David took blood samples to Camarang for microscopic analysis to determine the appropriate medication needed for each soldier. 4 additional Mercy flights saved the lives of seriously ill patients in other villages. Tired but blessed, David flew nearly 100 hours that month. During the dry season, it had always been hard to find potable water. One patient David had transported was stricken with typhoid fever from a polluted source of water. David thanked God for the ADRA projects that could provide clean, pure drinking water from wells in the future. He thought of another blessing that would come through their program: disease prevention. To make this challenging work happen, they would use modern technology to lure the villagers: a video projector, a VCR, a small generator, and a large screen. Videos on health education in English, but accompanied by Amerindians translating in the Akawayo or Arakuna dialects, would attract the entire village. After David had flown the ADRA visitors back to Georgetown, he and Becky reflected on God's ability to deal with the unknown. 1 year before, they had stepped out in faith into an uncertain future with no funds of their own. What had happened when they depended entirely on God? Housing, a balanced diet for their family, a small bush plane, operating permits and funds, new runways in isolated villages, miraculous multiplication of funds to pay bills, and a boarding industrial school had all been provided. To top it off, they had just learned that their daughters had received full scholarships in an excellent boarding academy in the United States. Can God be trusted to provide for his children? Absolutely. Too soon, the 10 days of flying permission expired. "Becky, let's sit down and talk." Putting his arm around her, David announced, "I must leave, sweetie pie. The grounded plane has to be parked at the Georgetown airport. I'll schedule the plane for maintenance during this downtime. I've been asked as the volunteer director of ADRA Guyana to participate in a 1-week seminar on disaster preparedness." "Where? And for whom?" "On the island of Antigua. They invited ADRA leaders from the Caribbean and the West Indies and French Antilles Unions. I hate to leave you alone so long with Carlos and Chris, but I'll try to keep in touch by radio. During that time, he used a solar-powered battery charger and a portable battery to make 2 daily radio contacts with Becky. Far away in the jungles of Guyana, she had to deal with several very ill children suffering from advanced malaria. She noted that malaria medications were running low. The next time David contacted her, she said, "I need you, David. With half our family away, the boys and I feel so lonely here. Many of the patients need a doctor, not just a nurse. I'm thankful we have Jesus here with us." As soon as he returned to Guyana, David contacted the director of civil aviation. "Sorry, but the communication from the minister is that the plane may not leave the ground until further notice, and that could be a long time." Desperate to join Becky, David and Winston kept up their prayer vigil. "We've got a mighty promise here, Winston. Listen. We have no might against this great company that cometh up against thee, neither know we what to do, but our eyes are upon thee. Thus saith the Lord unto you, Be not afraid nor dismayed by reason of this great multitude, for the battle is not yours, but God's." That's from 2 Chronicles. Still, David's daily visits to civil aviation always resulted in disinterested response. "No word yet." Radio contact with Becky added to his concern. She told him, "Yesterday afternoon, the captain from the village of Arua hiked 7 hours to Kaikan looking for malaria medications for some of the villagers, including our own native missionaries there. All I could do was pray and shed tears of frustration at being unable to provide medications to adequately treat these people we love. If only you could fly them in." David claimed the wonderful promise. Our Heavenly Father has 1,000 ways to provide for us, of which we know nothing. Those who accept the one principle of making the service and honor of God supreme will find perplexities vanish and a plain path before their feet. The next day, as David and Winston drove to the airport to do some work on the plane, they prayed for guidance. "Lord, please show us what you want us to do." Suddenly, God's answer began to develop clearly in David's mind. "Prepare for expansion. Winston, I'm impressed that this delay must be God's call to move forward more aggressively. He's telling us to expand to new regions where requests for Bible workers and medical care have been coming in for years." "But, David, that means a larger aircraft, unrestricted access to Guyana's interior. I'm sure you understand that with the increased flexibility and freedom we'll need, our operating costs will skyrocket. And who'll fly a second plane?" "I know the problems. That's the beauty of this whole plan. Funding for the program has always rested completely on God. Moving forward, at God's bidding would automatically result in an increase of available resources. Isn't it thrilling? Every advance by faith turns out to be a Jordan River experience, which builds our confidence that indeed the battle is the Lord's, not ours." Overwhelmed with the Spirit of the Lord, David stopped the car. The 2 men bowed their heads. With tears of joy flowing down their cheeks, they prayed, "God, we commit our plans into your hands. Please give us success with the people involved. Increase our funding as a sign that we're moving in the right direction." And Winston added, "Precious Father, we feel as if we're standing on Jordan's riverbank with our feet about to touch the water." Early the next morning, David called the air taxi company and explained his plan. "Impossible. The insurance company would never allow it." "Please let me speak to the general manager," David asked. "Nope, not now, but I'll pass on the message." That afternoon, someone from the air taxi company called. "Please give us a letter explaining your proposal in detail. Also include your pilot's resume." David acted promptly, and at the airport he met the air taxi's chief pilot. "I like your idea," he said, nodding his head. The following day, David received a message. "Come right away to speak with the managing director and the general manager." The men greeted David with interest as he stepped into the office. "We know about your medical program, but we have a few questions about your past flight experience in the Caribbean and abroad. Your request is to be included on our insurance company as a company pilot and to use one of our Cessna 206s. This is of interest to us. We find the proposal attractive." David's heart beat faster as he listened. "We are especially interested in the fact that you have a Piper Seneca type rating in your Guyana commercial pilot's license. As you know, we have a Seneca that we frequently can't fly because we have only a few qualified pilots with Seneca type ratings. We'll help you out with the Cessna 206 if you'll help us out by flying the Seneca on occasional international flights. We request that you cover the cost of the check flight to Kaikan in the 206 with our chief pilot. Later, we will check you out in the Seneca." David could hardly repress his elation as he summarized the proposal. Am I clear that I'll have a couple of local aircraft to add to the flexibility of our medical mission program without any restrictions? Will I be performing as temporary company pilot for the air taxi agency? Si. You will be allowed to fly anywhere in the country, but first you must coordinate your plans with the chief pilot for approval. Well, thank you so much. This will certainly make it easier and cheaper to handle larger groups of visitors as I take them into the interior. David felt as if he were walking on air as he left the office. God, the Jordan River has begun to part. Then the reality of his situation hit home. His funds from the U.S. for January had already come through, and he had committed them for school construction in Paruima. He didn't have enough money left to pay the rent for the 206 checkout. What do I do now, God? The promise in Psalm 46:10 flashed into his mind. Be still and know that I am God. I'll obey, God. I'll say nothing about my lack of money, but I'm a bit scared to commit funds that would put me beyond the limit of meeting current needs. Nevertheless, your biddings are enablings, so I'll go ahead and schedule the flight for Sunday. He thought he could also take advantage of the trip to fly the 4 members of the mission team into the interior. Katie, his oldest daughter, Julie, a student missionary, and a French couple who were coming to teach in Paruima. He would need new funds that week to break even, since he was not expecting any deposits for another 3 weeks. Thank you for letting me talk over my problems with you, the great God of the universe. Now I leave everything in your hands. On his way, David stopped to check his email. He read the one from his father first. Dear son, last night Helen Fisher, our church treasurer in Marion, Illinois, told me that since she was leaving on vacation, she had made arrangements to send in the available funds a bit early to our Guyana account. They have been deposited for your use. In reverence, David dropped to his knees. What a wonderful God you are. You arranged that nearly a whole month's worth of funding became available within an hour after I scheduled the plane checkout. The Jordan River has completely parted once again. Make a joyful noise unto God, all ye lands. Sing forth the honor of his name. Make his praise glorious. But God, I know I cannot weary you. Our small medical plane still sits on the ground. You're aware that our planned evangelistic work will be almost impossible without our small plane on those jungle runways. Many sick people with life-threatening health problems need transportation. I can't stay in the interior without that plane. Our eyes are upon you. You will do it, I know. A new minister of health had been appointed. Would he give his approval when the previous minister had refused? As they went to see him, David and Winston asked that God would give them favor in his eyes. First, they stopped to meet the Minister of Regional Development. Winston recognized him immediately. They had been kids growing up together. His friendliness gave them courage. I have a vital interest in seeing development in the interior. You can be assured of my complete support with your projects. A rumor was circulating that the new Minister of Health had been raised as a Seventh-day Adventist, but had turned against religion many years before. With another word of prayer, they entered his office. He sat with arms crossed. His unfriendly tone showed annoyance. I agree that to support your program in the cabinet meeting yesterday, but I have no idea what it is all about. David smiled and said, Well, I'll be glad to inform you. We're working in the interior to develop a partnership with your ministry. We want to be called on when opportunities develop for vaccinations and other emergencies. Our goal is that you'll consider us a valuable asset, a means of helping to improve the health of Guyana's residents in the interior. The minister smiled and seemed to relax. Do you use our radio frequency? No, we have not received proper authorization. David watched him scribble something on a notepad. I'll send a letter of authorization that will allow your base and plane to communicate directly with the regional hospital and the ministry. I've already given my support to the minister overseeing the Department of Civil Aviation. Should you need further help, you just let me know. Thrilled at the marked change of attitude, David asked, May we have a word of prayer with you, asking God's blessing on your leadership? And the minister consented. A few hours later, a representative in the Department of Civil Aviation called. Your permit has been renewed. Come and pick up the written authorization as soon as possible. Since your plane has a foreign registration, you'll have to operate on 3 months' permits up to a maximum of a year. With joy, David flew into his home airstrip at Kaikan for Sabbath. After he shared the blessings of God's leadership with his family, he added, "Now we must pray, trust, and wait for God to provide a permanent 4-seat aircraft that can be locally registered." "I think he's already given us the answer," Becky said as she opened her Bible. "Now unto him that is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that we ask or think, according to the power that worketh in us, unto him be glory in the church by Christ Jesus through all ages, world without end." That's from Ephesians 3. Word spread among the villages that the plane was operating again. The number of calls for mercy flights from isolated villages grew quickly. The village of Philippi, near the Brazilian border, had had an Adventist church in the past. It had fallen into disrepair. Many of the villagers belonged to 2 denominations with hostile feelings. Because of drought and a lack of river transportation, bringing in a sick person for help took more than 4 days. When David flew 3 seriously ill villagers to the hospital, he received a heartwarming response from formerly hostile people and their village captain. "If I brought the video equipment, would you show videos on health and the life of Christ?" he asked them. "Si, please do," a dozen voices behind him shouted. "Yes, yes." A district pastor visited the people when David showed the videos. Walls of separation began to crumble. They agreed to show the 5-week evangelistic campaign called Net 95. In response, the people of Philippi have rebuilt the church bigger than before. 2 more villages, Paruima and Waramadong, which already had some Adventist members, asked for the Net 95 series. A total of 65 people chose to accept Jesus and asked to be baptized in Paruima, and another group followed suit in Waramadong. Philippi and Chinawiang had very few Adventist members. As David flew around the region performing medical care, he brought fuel for the generators and food for the support team doing evangelistic work in those villages. Arua had become a village only 5 years before. The members there begged for a primary school. Classes began with 3 volunteers: Beverly Godet, a Guyanese teacher, Katie, David's daughter, and her good friend Julie Christman, the student missionary. But the older village folk begged, "Please let us go to school. All our life we've wanted to read. May we come too?" "I'm so sorry. There just isn't room, nor are there teachers available for so many." Disturbed at refusing them, David and Becky prayed for an idea. Christians could attend day classes and become Bible workers. But what to do with those who were not Christians? They needed help too. "Maybe we could put up a small community TV station run by solar charges. 100 watts of power would reach about 15 miles, which could include 3 or 4 of the 8 villages in the upper Mazaruni River District. The whole village could pool their resources and buy 1 solar panel, a battery, and 1 television. Then everyone could come and watch." "Well, that sounds great. With no other channels to watch but our Christian station, we could beat the devil at his own game," Becky said with a laugh. "The village people would enjoy programs, both in dialect and English, using nature and health and religious videos. But where can you get permission to operate this?" "Well, from the government, from the new Prime Minister, Samuel Hines himself. I'll stop at his office and get the details from his secretary." The secretary informed David, "You must collect signatures from all the village leaders and people. Unless they want what you have to offer, your request will not be considered." A month later, David had arranged a meeting for all the religious leaders and all the captains or chiefs of the 8 villages in the area around Kaikan. He explained what he planned to do with the TV station. They listened carefully. "If you want this, you must sign these papers." The first person that stood up, an Anglican priest, took his pen and said, "I want to be the first to sign that we want Adventist television here." He started the trend. The other ministers followed. Soon the teachers and the village captains joined. Everyone present eagerly signed the petition. David took the pages of signatures to the office of the Prime Minister. He never expected such unanimous approval, but David knew the influence of the medical and educational work had brought trust and a change in attitude. The signers added 1 stipulation: "We will only allow this TV station if David Gates is in charge of the operations or someone he approves." Amidst all these blessings at the spread of the gospel, Satan showed his hate by aiming a deadly weapon at the people: mosquitoes. Another epidemic of malaria struck, not only in Kaikan but many surrounding villages. 3 times in 3 weeks, David's family was confined to bed with fever, chills, headache, nausea. David recovered from the P. Falciparum parasite. But then Becky got it from a single mosquito that somehow got into the net. He promptly got the Vivax strain. After taking medication, he began to recover. Then Becky became ill again. All the families in the villages suffered this way. As soon as one felt better, another family member got sick. Something would have to be done. 2 malaria officers spent 3 weeks in Kaikan treating more than 100 patients. However, family members kept reinfecting each other. David contacted ADRA for emergency funds. Because it was difficult to get patients to take multiple treatments of medications, they opted for an expensive but effective one-time treatment called mefloquine, a single dose of which wipes out multiple types of malaria. ADRA Canada and ADRA Holland approved the funding so that everyone in the village could take this medication at the same time. As an added precaution, 2 shipments of treated mosquito nets made especially for hammocks arrived from the Ministry of Health. Local people were trained and materials provided so that hammock-style mosquito nets could be made. The Ministry of Amerindian Affairs loaned David a fogger machine to spray the houses with insecticide and vegetable oil, the latter to assure the walls would hold the insecticide. Cockroaches, bugs, and mosquitoes dropped dead after the spray. Each day the people found dead insects on the floor and table. Filled with hope, the villagers prayed that this triple approach would eradicate the serious malaria threat. David flew to the village of Arua and discovered that almost all the residents had come down with malaria. Would the epidemic never end? Dr. Faye Whitting Jensen, medical director for Davis Memorial Hospital, flew into Arua with David and personally supervised the mass treatment of all residents. The results were a resounding success. Arua became the only village with no reported cases of malaria during the rest of the epidemic. The loving attention poured out on so many sick persons also resulted in spiritual growth for many. David smiled. We surely keep God busy working on the miracles of human heart. Soon the 3-month operating permit for our little plane will expire. More volunteers will arrive for work in the interior at that time. David paused and looked heavenward. God, we wait upon you. I'm sure you'll come through just in time. As usual, the dependable God who delights in bringing joy to his children did come through. On June 11th, David received a phone call from the Civil Aviation Office. Your flight permit on the Cessna has been renewed for another 3 months. David shared his joy with Becky, and then he mentioned a need that was on his mind. I do hope that God impresses the right people to volunteer as an aviation mechanic and a professional pilot, that they'll come and assist me with the workload. Oh, God will provide in his own time, Becky assured him. She always spoke with faith. Could it be that God keeps us in heaven's waiting room to perfect our faith? But for now, I rejoice that Davis Indian Industrial College is debt-free. Next week, we'll break ground for the Religion Center and library. Our cup is running over. Indeed it is. Each day we face further challenges as God opens a new vista for his plans in Guyana. I wonder what's next on his agenda. Returning from Georgetown, David hurried from the runway to his house. Rushing down the sloping path, he called from the door, Becky, where are you? God's doing exciting things again. Coming down the stairs, she met him with a hug and a kiss. Please sit down before you fall down. I'm listening. Well, remember I told you about the large beacon tower next to the runway in Kemarang owned by Civil Aviation? They're willing to allow us to lease a space on the tower where we can place a TV broadcast antenna. God impressed me to send in an application form and ask for an appointment with the Prime Minister to discuss getting a TV station broadcast license for Kemarang. What happened? The Prime Minister arrived 45 minutes late. The security scanned us with their metal scanner and checked us for weapons. Finally, they escorted Winston and me into the Prime Minister's office. Standing by his desk, he looked angry as he shuffled some papers. Without looking up, he raised his voice. Why are you here? He repeated his demand 3 times, getting louder each time. We kept silent until he paused. We wish to thank you very much for the privilege of coming to see you. And then he said, Stop talking, tell me what you want. I whispered to Winston, You talk to him while I pray. Finally, the Prime Minister looked up, pointed to the chairs, and demanded, Sit down. And that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for joining us today on Continued Story Reading. I'm reading the story of David Gates, Mission Pilot. I'm your host, Keith Borgelt, with Bill Bosse at the controls. Thank you so much, and join us again next time.